Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Conval 5th Community Forum. We, your Conval School Board and Administration, want to sincerely thank all of you for the taking of your time to share in this important information and communications event. I'm Alan Edelkind, Conval School Board representative from Dublin, Vice Chair of the School Board, and Chairman of the Communications Committee who organized this forum. As I've done in previous forums, before I talk about the forum, I'd like to take a minute to talk about your school board and administration, because I think it's a very important thing to understand. We, as your school board and administration, have an obligation to do what is the best for our children and our community. That is to provide the best, most cost-effective, and safest educational environment. We must also be open and transparent in our communication to all before, during, and after our activities. This community forum is a means to do exactly that, communicate and inform. But who is the school board? Now that is a cool question. We are just like all of you. We are Conval community residents. Some are retired, some are semi-retired, and some are employed full-time. We live in the Conval community, we raise our children here, we pay taxes just like you do, and we enjoy living here. We, your school board, give freely of our time, energy, knowledge to work for the Conval community. We are your neighbors and are here to serve our community because we feel it is our obligation to provide needed leadership for our children and community and to do the best job possible to ensure that we provide for the best and safe educational environment at the right cost. That's who your school board is. 13 community folks, just like all of you. But what of our responsibilities? The role of a school board, different than a lot of people think, is not to run the school, but to see that they run well. We set and establish school board policy. We establish the school district's budget and provide budget oversight. We hire and evaluate the superintendent. We conduct hearings and serve as an adjudicative body, participate in collective bargaining, communicate with the public, and deal with strategic planning. What's it like to run a school system? Running a school system like Conval is a daunting job, and we are fortunate to have for our superintendent, Dr. Kimberly Saunders. Think of it, superintendent equals CEO, a major $56 million diverse organization subject to the many rules and regulations of the federal, state, and local authorities. 11 separate school locations, a central office, the SAU, an everyday customer population of almost 2,000 students, 9 different communities to integrate into one cohesive approach and direction, diverse staff, many different individual needs, constant funding source issues. It's unlike any other organization. The complexity, to me, is amazing. It is not a 9-to-5 job. The school board relationship to the superintendent is also unique. Other industries that I've been involved with have boards that meet once a month. Sometimes they meet once a quarter. Here, the school board and the superintendent interact constantly, almost daily. Do we always agree? No, but that's good. Different opinions and approaches equal well thought out and executed activities. That's what your school board is. That's what the administration deals with us. Now, to the forum information. This forum is totally dedicated to sharing information about our budget, our school district budget. If you notice, I said our budget, not your budget or the budget. It is all of ours. Every community member and school board member is impacted by the budget in various ways. There is only a minor percentage of the budget that we have control over. there's approximately 85% that we do not have control over. These are costs such as contracts, salaries, fixed obligations, etc. We are subject to mandates from the government, with some coming to us as unfunded. We need to do them, but we don't get the funds to do them. We are also the lowest state in state aid to education. For the approximate 15% of the budget that we do have control over, we have to continually balance providing an educationally rich, safe, and cost-effective environment. You will see that we have done this in the upcoming presentations. Remember, we are 9 diverse communities representing small and mid-sized towns. How's this forum organized? Like previous forums, we have presentations. For this one, we have 4 presentations scheduled, all discussing different aspects of the budget and its preparation. The second and fourth forum presentations will be followed by question and answer periods where the community folks have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments and receive replies. We will alternate the questions from in-house and online audience to give each a fair chance to be heard. If time permits, we will also have an open Q&A period where any question can be asked as a relevant topic and we'll attempt to answer. The 4 presentations are as follows. A layman's view of the budget. Liz Swam, Temple School Board Representative. Administration budget process. Dr. Kimberly Saunders, Conval Superintendent. The proposed budget and warrant article, Catherine Heck, Sharon School Board Representative. And the budget process Greenfield, excuse me, Catherine, I'm sorry. Greenfield School Board Representative. The budget process and 2022 final tax bill, Jim Frederickson, Sharon School Board Representative, and Chair of our Budget and Property Committee. For this forum, we will have 2 moderators. Doug Sutherland, Hancock Board Rep, will be our in-house moderator. He will introduce all speakers, coordinate the in-house audience, question and answers, and ensure that all is proceeding for the best experience. The second moderator is Liz Swan, Temple Board Rep. If her name sounds familiar, that's because she's also hosting our first presentation. Liz will be receiving all of the online audience questions from our email address. She will organize them and present them so they can be answered. Lastly, we will be hosting a meet and greet at the end of the forum in the high school cafeteria, or actually outside the door. This is an informal get-together with light snacks for the community to meet and talk to the other community members, school board reps, and administration. This is informal and will only last a half an hour. We hope you attend. Almost done. I want to sincerely thank all of the folks that have been involved in organizing this community forum, both the presenters and the offstage folks. Special thanks, as always, to Mark Schwab District Systems Administrator for putting together all of the audio, visual, and communications infrastructure for this and previous audiences. And thank you to all the folks behind the scenes that have made this forum possible. Lastly, thank you, our audiences, for taking your time to join us in this important event. One side note, Lori Schmidt, our business administrator, is under the weather. She was planning on being here tonight to field questions, but she will not be able to attend tonight as planned. We wish her a speedy recovery. I'd now like to turn the forum over to Doug Sutherland, School Board Rep from Hancock, and the in-house forum moderator. It's all yours, Doug.
Oh, clap it. Thank you, Alan. Good evening, everyone. My name is Doug Sutherland. I'm the Hancock School Board Rep. I had this whole, monologue planned out, and kind of get you warmed up. No, I'm just joking. We're just going to jump right into it. I'm going to have, as Alan said, I will be handling the in-house questions from our packed house here tonight, and Liz Swan, who's going to be handling the online stuff, and also doing our first presentation. So let's just jump right into it. Liz, why don't you come on up?
Thank you, Doug. So great to be here. Thanks for coming. Really happy to see you guys. Thanks for joining us online, if you are indeed online right now. My take on the budget, it's really not so much a layman's view of the budget. No, you can't hear me? Sorry. Okay, all right. Now that we're all on the same page, quite literally. Thanks for being here. So I'm going to just share my personal experience of how we come to understand the budget and how we come to collaborate and create the budget. This is not going to be me talking about numbers and logistics and particulars and percentages and details, because the people who are talking after me are much better at that. But I can tell you my own experience. So for me, when I first became a board member, I have a specific area of knowledge because I have had specific careers in my life. There's no way that a board member can come onto a board and know everything there is to know about a school board, let alone a school board budget, which seems like a very daunting and overwhelming task to actually come to understand, because there's a lot of moving parts and there are a lot of ways that we receive information, and there's a lot of different ways that we are required to implement different programs, okay? So how do we onboard as school board members to set us up for success? We have an onboarding process, we have training, we have access to resources like the New Hampshire School Board Association, where we can take classes and expand our knowledge so that we're more comfortable in dealing with certain issues and being able to up-level our own perspective on these things so that we can make informed decisions when it comes to time to vote. And how we navigate this process of budgeting, I'll show you my special binder. You know, I like a prop, I'm sorry, I'm a theatrical type of person. So this binder is a labor of love right here. The board members do not put this together. This is put together by the administrators and the educators and the professionals in our district. And we have a budget work session where we come together as a school board and the administration, along with educators and some professionals, and we gather to discuss the different requests that are being asked of us each year to consider for the budget. And we go through the process of what each of those items are, the justification section, and then we collaborate, we discuss. There might be some debate, and we arrive at some conclusion at the end of each of those points, each of those items. And what we want to do is be able to reach a consensus so that we have a clear path forward, right? Because it's important for us to be able to communicate to you clearly what we are recommending and what we have put our stamp of approval on. And we want to make sure that we always are taking into consideration our community members, because we are also community members, as Alan said. So it's very important to us that you understand the resources that are also available to you as community members, whether it is coming to an actual board meeting and engaging with us, making a public comment, coming to a forum, or attending the deliberative session after we've decided what the budget is going to look like. These are very important things that we feel very passionately about, because you can't make a decision if you're not well informed. But I will tell you this. This budget has been put together so meticulously. Everything in it is necessary. We've come together to really put something in front of you that is reasonable, but that will help keep our kids learning, our teachers here in our district, our administrators here, and our whole community happy. Because without being able to support and empower the kids in the district, we're really not doing our job. And so when we are finished with this process, we ask of you to consider the different elements in the budget and to cast your vote on voting day. And we hope that before that happens, you will ask us questions and engage with us so that you have the opportunity to understand more in depth. But here we are, and we want to always make sure that everyone has what they need in terms of knowledge when it comes to the budget. And it's a daunting task. So we have some experts here that are going to come up and talk a little bit more. But Doug will come right on back up here. Come on, Doug. I thought he was going to do a tap number, but he didn't take the bait. All right. No. Next time. All right.
Thank you, Liz. I will say that I was lucky enough to participate in some of those trainings that you talked about. One of them, our very own Catherine Heck, was a part of one of those trainings, which was good to have expertise not only in the state, but also in our district. So anyway, that's there. The next person we have coming up is Dr. Kimberly Saunders, going to talk about the administrative budget process.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you the 100,000-foot view of how we put together a $53 million budget. So certainly I would anticipate that you'll have questions, but let's just start, like, where do we start? So we start this process actually during the summer. We start usually late July, early August, getting some direction from the board. We refer to that as budget guidance. These have three major components. They're programmatic, so those things that have to do with the programs that we offer to students. They are procedural, so things that might be considered more administrative, replacement cycles, things that have to do with our facilities and operations, as well as things like planned curriculum renewals. Then financial, meeting the contractual obligations that the district has to outside people like the bus company. And obviously any legal requirements. You can see this is basically our budget prep line. We start again, rollout to our administrators actually starts in September, where we roll out, here's the guidance, we need you to start. Taking a look, a deep dive into your budget. We spend most of September and October actually reviewing and revising what's going to go before the board. Then we actually have a all administrative workshop where all of the administrators come together because we have to work in the best interest of all of our students and we have to prioritize. So, you know, if every school wants something, we can't always have everything end up in the budget. So what we do is we meet as an administrative team and we prioritize those requirements. Then we always hold the budget the first Saturday in November. This year we held it for a variety of reasons the second Saturday in November. Our first public hearing is always in early January. We follow a very clear statutory schedule for these hearings. We have deliberative session this year. It was on February 7th. And then our vote happens on the 14th. So that's kind of just the general timeline that we work in. So this year we looked at some really specific challenges. Those challenges including a 4% guaranteed maximum rate of 4% in our health insurance, significant increases in energy and facilities costs, everything from how much it costs to turn the lights on to how to heat the building to the water that comes into our buildings. We also have to decide during this part, and then at that first time with the board, is about what we call budgeting to maximum exposure. So, do we budget to maximum exposure? So that 4% increase, we get a guaranteed maximum rate from the health insurance company? Do we budget to that 4%, or do we take the chance that that rate might come in lower? And if it doesn't come in lower, are we willing to go into our trust funds? We do have a health insurance trust fund in order to make up that difference. And then revenue decreases. We have a decrease in state adequacy, and we also had a decrease as they phase out certain types of funding. So in order to create budget version 1, we take all that into consideration, and then we do the admin team review. Over the past 3 years, we have actually asked every administrator to go line by line by line, which might not seem like a big deal, but their building budgets can have up to 750 to 800 lines. And we ask them to really align what they're doing, particularly now that we have a new strategic plan, to that strategic plan. I'm going to talk to you about the questions that we ask. We also have them take a look at projected enrollment numbers by grade and review current staffing levels, making sure that district policy and state guidelines are being followed. And if they're not, then where are we and what are we going to do about that? So we had some district level questions to resolve this time. And I'm not going to read these to you, but these are some things that we consider. Is there equity across our budget? Are we having some buildings have things that others don't have the capacity to run? Or is there actually a difference? An example of this would be between the 2 middle schools. We might look at how much are we spending per student on co-curriculars or athletics. Because, well, we might spend more at SMS because there's more students and less at GBS because there's less students. The same amount of money per student should be in and around what we're spending, give or take maybe $1 or $2. But generally speaking, we want to make sure that our per student cost for our co-curricular and athletic programs is consistent. How can we decrease the budget if that's necessary? And this year at a 1.35% increase in the operating budget, please understand that in this inflationary cycle, that actually represents a cut. So how can we decrease the budget without the potential risk of a deficit? Because I don't know how long some of you have lived in New Hampshire, but deficit appropriations, those don't go well. So we want to make sure that we are not in a situation where we have the risk of a deficit. How can we increase revenues? And or how do we decrease the impact of, how can we decrease the impact that the decrease in the revenues is having? We also ask some what we call mission critical questions. Because at the end of the day, we shouldn't just be planning a budget, we really should be budgeting our plan. And that, in this case, is now the strategic plan. How are we going to best put things forward for the benefit of our students? And so these are our 5 critical questions. Now, at each level, we ask additional questions. And we really push the elementary level. Have you thought of this? How does this fit into the strategic plan? How does this move the strategic plan forward so that we can improve our learning environment for students? Because at the end of the day, that's what this budget is about, is how are we delivering the service that is in the best interest of our students? We have those questions for the middle school. And we also have those mission critical questions for the high school. The questions are similar at each level, but they do vary because our students vary developmentally from elementary, middle, and high. Finally, One of the things we did this year, particularly to meet the challenge of what has been an extraordinary inflationary cycle, is we made sure that we leveraged dollars to do more for students. So that was the entire focus. How can we leverage our dollars so that this is impacting students most directly? We maximized our flexibility for trade-offs. And those trade-offs, and there's always trade-offs in a budget, but those trade-offs had to directly impact students. We reviewed one-time expenditures, so this really helped us this year. We looked at how we could best use our grant funding, so that ESSER money, for one-time expenses. The reason that we did that was because we wanted to make sure that we weren't in a situation where we put ESSER dollars towards something and then those ESSER dollars weren't going to exist. So we did that for one-time expenses, and we were able to step in some other positions that we might not have been able to do, so that it would spread out, because we never want to see our budgets do this. We always want to kind of have them go up slowly or go down if we can make that happen. We did have to eliminate some positions. We are so far very fortunate that we believe that we will be able to do that through retirement and resignations rather than having to riff staff. And we did that when there wasn't student enrollment to support that individual. So that we could continue making sure we're delivering high quality programming for our students while still being fiscally responsible. So that resulted in what ended up being the 23-24 proposed budget. This is not the first proposed budget, just so you know. This goes back and forth a couple of times. This is the final proposed budget, which is $53,819,282. It represents about $720,000 in increases, and that's a 1.35%. I am going to turn it over, or no, we're going to stop and do questions and answers now, right? Okay, I'll stay here.
Thank you, Dr. Saunders. Okay, so this is our first question and answer period. We're going to start off with in-house and then move to online. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you, if you're able, to come up to the podium here in the middle of the room and ask your question. And then we'll jump to any online questions. So, anyone have any questions? Here we go. Come on up.
I got to ask a question, right? Do you guys know offhand what the current enrollment is for the whole Conval School District and what the cost per student is with this budget? And I want to also thank the school board. With this climate, this really is phenomenal that you did not raise it, significantly. And so kudos.
You're going to tell them that the administration, brought it in under your ask, right? Yeah.
The administration brought it in under our ask.
So actually, I would have to go back to I do have that figure, but I don't have it off the top of my head. So at last count, we had 2,002 students. But again, I would have to go back and do the exact cost per student.
Okay.
So you could probably do the math really quickly too.
$26,882 per student. Does that
So
sound
at
about right?
elementary, it's $25,236.46. At middle school, it's $20,600. Nope, these are last year's. Right, $20,617.90, and high school's $20,378.99. That does include transportation.
And will you be addressing what your plan is for the future in terms of reducing the budget even further? Just because we can't increase the budget every year for the next, 20, 30 years because the taxpayers are just feeling it.
So as somebody who pays taxes, I hear you, Serena. I get it. You know, I live in a town who has among the highest taxes in the state, so I honestly empathize significantly. I will say that obviously we have some things, you know, the Conval School Board has not been quiet about adequacy and those decrease in revenues. You know, we will be on April 10th with the trial will begin for the lawsuit. And so that's one area is really looking carefully at the revenues. The second area is looking at our district as a whole and saying where can we make cuts and how do we make those cuts appropriately so that we can continue to offer the best product for our students without the increase in costs. But more than 75% of our costs are directly related to personnel. We're a human service industry, and you know, we have an increase just like your cost of living increased. All of our teachers' cost of living increased as well. So those costs continue to go up, as does health insurance and those kinds of things. So you know, the 1.35%. I think last year was sub 2. Those are significantly low increases to the budget. And again, this year at 1.35, that is a cut. That is,
Right.
well,
And I don't want to undermine the 1.3% because that is really great. But I also come from manufacturing and industry. And if you were to look at this from a business perspective, you would be looking at the cost per student, and you would be saying, how can we provide a better product for less money? Because that's how you survive in business. And I think
if we were in a business model, then we would look at our 11 schools, some of which have enrollments as low as under 50, and a business could move and say, we're simply going to shutter that school and move forward. That has not been an option for the taxpayers in the nine communities, and that is another area that the district is going to have to grapple with. If we're going to continue to have an 11-school model, what are the taxpayers willing to do in order to maintain that?
so is that something that needs to be citizen-driven, or is that something the school board's looking at?
I know
or-
that the school board is presently looking at that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Not a problem, Serena.
Thank you. Is there an online question? Okay, let's go back to in-house. Any other in-house questions for Liz Swan or Dr. Rizzo-Saunders? All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to our third presentation. Is Catherine Heck, our Greenfield School Board rep, not Sharon.
Hold on, I think there's a clicker here. Nope. Wrong way, okay. Can everybody hear me okay? So lights in my eyes, I didn't practice finger puppetry for today. I didn't know that was gonna be an
That's why I kept
option
moving
for my
over.
presentation. All right, so obviously I'm Catherine Heck, I'm the Greenfield representative, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about budget information. I did wanna just take a moment to finish answering your question, because I represent the school board, and certainly the superintendent has a different role. The school board is actively looking at our 11 schools and the model that we're currently delivering information. And there is a committee that's been very public, the Strategic Organization Committee, that is looking at RFPs and RFIs to see if we can bring in a consultant to see how we can best educate our children in the largest geographic district in the state, with 9 towns. So that is something that we are really exploring. We do realize that this is a concern, but we have to go through a methodical process to identify and address the scope and sequence of what that might look like and have as many stakeholders involved in that process. So I appreciate your comment, and we are sensitive to that, and we are looking into it full-heartedly. And there are school board minutes, and there's meetings happening, so please check that out and get involved, because you're welcome to join. All right, so budget information. My presentation is going to be a little bit dry and boring. I'll try to make it fun, but you can find so much budget information on our website, on the school board website, if you would like to. We have the proposed budget information, budget presentations, budget hearing, deliberative session, and financial articles. So it's a great resource that I just wanted to make sure that I point out. So if you have any questions, those go into even more detail if you're interested. So the budget development. So in municipal finance, so school being a municipal entity or a government entity, we have two options: a level service budget that we tend to look at, which would provide and deliver pretty much the same services as the previous year, and it would allow us to really analyze the cost of delivering that same service year over year. However, the challenge to that is goods and services, the prices increase, salaries, goods and services. The other option that you generally hear about is a level funded budget. Level funded budgets allocate the same amount of money every year. However, it does not deliver the same service necessarily because of those rising costs. So it automatically creates cuts. A decrease in revenue would also indicate those cuts. So I'm going to talk to you more, Kimberly really did go on the 100,000-foot view, so I don't know if I'm on the 1,000,000-foot view at this point as a school board member, because we're governance. We're really just to make sure that the budget is developed to meet our goals and objectives and to meet the students' needs, the staff's needs and goals, and of course be sensitive to the taxpayer. So those are the two types of budgets, and we can't really look at either one of those individually because we can't always have level services without making cuts. But we really want to keep that funding in a place where it's only ticking up very slowly because we have to be sensitive to the taxpayers and make sure we're not exceeding our district fiscal capacity. So with that said, the superintendent really did go line by line, which is considered zero balanced budgeting, where you're actually starting at zero and looking at each line to see where you really need to be. So I did want to point out that we really were sensitive, and we scrubbed this budget as hard as possible to make sure that we were bringing you what we felt could deliver the same levels of service in the areas that we need to maintain, create new programs wherever they were needed, and of course be sensitive to the taxpayer. So to compare our two budgets from the current year that we're in right now, this budget will end on June 30th, and the new budget will take effect on July 1. So we're at 53.1 million is our current budget, and once you add federal programs and trust funds for $1 million, we're at 56.3. Now our proposed budget goes to 53.8. As Kimberly pointed out, it's a $718,000 increase, or 1.35%. So that's the difference between the current budget and the proposed budget. So I know Kimberly was very clear on that, so I won't spend too much time there. So ranking our priorities and expenditures through a budget process. So in governance, once the administration and the team has gone through the budget line by line and they bring it to us in November, we always want to create that predetermined clear set of criteria that's going to evaluate all objects, programs, projects, and services. So we gave budget guidance back in September to make sure that we were very clear on what we expected to come to us. We want to promote equity and procedural justice, of course, and the allocation of the limited resources that we have. And we want to ensure that all existing resources are maintained before we start new initiatives. And of course, we want to consider if there's anything that no longer fits our needs or our strategic plan, that we can retire those assets, or that program can be discontinued, and that we can redirect those resources where they are more needed. So that is a process that really is done mostly by administration, and of course, below administration, department heads, teachers, staff, they do the yeoman's work here. We're just in the governance seat where we get all this information brought to us, and then the choices are laid on the table and the justifications as to why. So we really do go through this very carefully. So warrant Article 1 that you'll be voting on in next week. Wow, it's already here. Why did I think that was further away? We'll be asking you to vote on a gross budget of $56.1 million. The state of New Hampshire, under Chapter 32 budget law, requires us to do the gross budget. Of course, we're going to be subtracting, although we're spending the federal money, that $2.2 million, that's subtracted from, of course, what your local taxation will be. However, we are subject to disclose that by law. So the operating budget will determine our staffing programs and facilities. And of course, if we do not accept the gross budget and it's not approved, the default budget will take effect. The default comes in at $54.7 million. It's a $1.3 million decrease, or 2.49%. And we'll talk a little bit more about the default in a moment. I did want to get into a few of the budget details with you. So of course, as you saw from Kimberly's presentation, that salaries and benefits are 76% of our budget. As Alan also mentioned, that this is non-negotiable. We are the human services industry. There's no way around that. So teachers, people, are affecting people in this industry that we're in, of education. So that is non-negotiable. Some of the drivers are the health plan, as Kimberly touched on. That's a 4% increase. While New Hampshire retirement came down this year from 21.02% to 19.64%, which is what the employer or the school district is required to pay, salaries went up because we're in the second year of a collective bargaining agreement. So when we talk about our benefits, salaries and benefits go hand in hand. So we see that there was a 3.7% increase in those benefits. When we look at our professional services, and purchase services, we have student services that need to be maintained or increased to serve our students in whatever capacity is necessary. So that was an 8.9% increase. So those are a few of the budget drivers. Some of the other highlights that I want to talk about are in property services. You'll see that's down 10%. And other services also down 4%. So these are areas where we really looked carefully at what we were doing. Now, supplies and materials, it's going to have its own slide because that is a huge budget driver. That is more than half of the increase that we're asking the district for in that 1.35%, 15.92% increase in supplies and materials. Debt service, it's great to know that that is down 68.38% because we're doing our last principal payment on the science lab, and the gym bond is going to fall off, so that we will no longer be paying. So that's very positive news. So this does include a 3% increase in school transportation, because we're in the third year of a contract, which is our normal transportation excluding gas. So we're going to talk a little bit about these inflationary budget drivers. We had the same little graphic, Kimberly and I, on inflation. I don't know, must have caught our eye in bright orange. So supplies and materials. Electricity is up $267,000. Heating oil, $172,000. Propane, $20,000. Software support, $26,000. So all others were down. But this is really driving a big part of our budget. When we combine that with the transportation contract, the second year of a teacher's contract, really, this is all where your increases can be found. It's not in any real huge new initiatives. While we do have a few that have been replaced by old ones and other pilot programs, these are your real budget drivers here, the same things you're all experiencing at home. So what did the school board do to ensure that we are bringing you a budget that was sensitive, understanding what you're all going through at home? So we look at the municipal cost index as one area. So many of you will talk about the consumer price index. You're all familiar with that. You hear it in the news all the time. Governments have we have our own indices because we're very lucky. No, that's because typically the cost for government services tend to be a little bit different than private industry. So when we shook out in December, 6.69% was the increase in municipal or government services. Nationwide, just like when we're looking at CPI. When we were developing the budget, we were at almost 8 and 9% when we were looking at the initial budget development. You'll see that the consumer price index came in December at 6.39%. However, when we were developing the budget, we were at 8.25 and 7.71% of an increase. And that's what everybody in America was dealing with, everyone in New Hampshire as well. So we were very sensitive to that and said, we can't bring a budget when everybody's dollar just shrunk. Our taxpayers' dollar just shrunk, our staff dollars, they're shrunk, everybody's buying power is less. We want our staff to live in our district, that's really important. And we want people to come, live, work, and play here in the Conval School District. So we were very sensitive to that. So the default budget warrant article. I'm going to talk a moment about this because the default, in the event that the budget does not pass, at that 1.35%, then we are required to use the default. The default is a calculation that is based solely on a legal formula that takes contractual obligations you have to add back in. Let me start over. The default budget essentially freezes last year's budget in place, so it's frozen, except for legal obligations like the teacher's contract we have to pay and transportation that we would have to, that is allowed to be in the default. We have to take out one-time expenditures, and we have to take out any non-reoccurring expenditures. This is a formula created by law under Chapter 32 that we have to follow. It's prescribed by law, and the result when we do the calculation is a negative 2.49%, and that's the amount of money that we will have to cut out of this current budget, which of course we have a plan for. There's a prescribed calculation methodology that reduces this 1.3 million, and we always start with the lowest direct impact on students and slowly moving through this bullseye tier into the hierarchy until we get to essentially core essential programming. So we hope it never has to come to that, but that is how we go through that process. And of course, after the district has met and voted, and we have those calculations, in the event of a default, we would have to have an immediate meeting because this would be a really long process before July 1 to know exactly the areas that we have to cut those dollars in. So the budget we are bringing you is what we consider not only level services, but we've increased some services in some areas, and it's as level funded as we could possibly be in an inflationary environment that we're currently in. Now, school budget warrant articles numbers 2 through 7 deal with trust funds or capital reserve funds. These all come from fund balance. The reasons why we're asking you for the dollars in the trust funds, last year we asked for $1 million, they came out of fund balance. This year we're asking for the same $1 million. The reason for that is that it's not through taxation, and they align with our strategic goals and the needs of our capital plan. So we use our capital reserve funds because we have targets that we'd like to meet. Some might not be until 2025 when we have a large project to come due, and some might be more immediate. But we level fund these, we fund with target balances these reserve funds using a chart that goes out 6 years. And we know what our expenses are going to be in the out years and the kinds of dollars that we're asking you for if we have fund balance available. So what we're asking you specifically for is Article number 2 is $500,000 in the Building Capital Reserve Fund. Article number 3, the Energy Efficiency Fund, $125,000, and that is to buy out the solar project. It had a 6-year provision. That is to specifically buy out the solar project that's on the high school roof so that we can maximize the savings to the district. Article number 4 is technology, $75,000. Number 5 is equipment for $25,000. The building capital reserve you're going to see again because, of course, they are funded through fund balance, which means only if we have leftover money at the end of the year will these warrant articles be fulfilled. So it's not taxing you again. It's the tax dollars we've already raised and appropriated, and if they weren't used for another purpose, then we will fund these articles with them. And then the health maintenance, as Kimberly touched on, if we needed to use that because our health premiums came in at a different rate, then we have this trust fund in case we didn't budget to maximum exposure or the rates changed. So all of these funds will be funded in the order in which they appear on the ballot. So if we only have $500,000 in fund balance left, only the building capital reserve will be funded. If we have $625,000 left, you kind of see where I'm going there, then the next one will be funded. So again, this is no additional taxation. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jim Frederickson, the Chair of Budget and Property from Sharon. We do have a Sharon rep here, who's going to talk to you more about your property tax bills. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. Can I make a heart? There you go, I did it. Hand puppets.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm Jim Frederickson from Sharon, not Greenfield. I get to talk about the fun stuff. They talked about the costs. Everything up to now has been all about cost. The operating cost is what we use to drive the district and what Kimberly can spend on teachers and books and programs and stuff. I'm going to talk about revenues, and the difference between the costs and revenues is what ends up in your tax bill. That's the fun part of the discussion, right? So we've already talked about the gross budget. We've already gone through that. It's minus 0.5% is a decrease. And the way you get to the district assessment is basically, district assessment is what is the basis of your local property tax calculation, okay? So if you follow, I can't see what I'm doing over there. You take the gross budget, you take off estimated revenues and state funding, and the balance has to be made up in district assessment, the local taxes, local property taxes. You can't just use that 3.86% number as an estimate of your taxes next year because there's a lot of moving parts. And I'm going to walk you through all the moving parts to show you how you get from the district assessment to your local individual town property tax bill, okay? That's my intention here. So to do that, we need to step back and look at schedule. And you'll notice here, there's right in the middle column, we got the 2000, I'm going to talk about the 2022 tax bill. There's two tax bills you got last year. You got one in May, your preliminary tax bill, and you got your final tax bill in December. You notice this chart, I got it bracketed by 2 fiscal years, fiscal year 21 and 22, excuse me, 22 and 23. And the reason I did that is because both of those the numbers from both those tax years impact your tax bills. I'm going to walk you through all that. Your final tax bill last December was based on the estimated fiscal year 22-23 budget and the fiscal year 21-22 fund balance, which Catherine just mentioned. What's fund balance? You're going to learn, okay? We're going to talk about fund balance. And that's, when is that fund balance available? It's after the prior year closes. It's not available right now. We won't know until a year from now. If you vote in this budget now, we won't know what the fund balance resulting from this budget until a year and a half from now, right? So it's all about timing. Your preliminary tax bill, though, is calculated based on 1/2 of the final 2021 tax rate. Remember all this stuff, right? We're going to be a quiz later. So let's go back, like Liz said, let's do away with the numbers. Let's get back to basics without numbers. A budget is costs and revenues. Costs we've talked about. Operating budget plus your federal state programs plus your trust funds equals your gross budget. Revenues comes from 3 sources, federal, state, and local. We're going to walk through some of this in detail. First thing I want you to remember is that any budget is an estimate at any given point in time. Time changes, numbers change. Remember that. In a school district, costs cannot exceed revenues. There's no such thing as deficit spending in a school district. We just can't do it. So revenues typically exceed costs. In fact, they almost always exceed costs at the end of the fiscal year. So we go through the year, you add up all your revenues, you add up all your costs, and you've got the difference. What happens to that? That's what we call the fund balance, okay? Basically, fund balance is any unreserved funds at the close of the fiscal year. That fund balance at the end of last year is treated in an accounting point of view as revenue this year. It's local revenue this year, okay? I'll show you why that matters. So let's go back to the district assessment chart again for a second. And you can see what we've got broken down here. We've got the gross budget, and we've got estimated revenues and state funding as 2 separate lines because they matter differently. Where they come from is, Lori gave me a crib sheet on this today. Revenues is basically our estimate of revenues. That's basically all federal, state, and local programs. And the interesting thing about that, if you look at the details of the budget, the revenues equals the cost in that. For federal programs or state programs, revenue always equals cost. Okay, it's our estimate of what's going to happen. So that really doesn't impact, that's not going to really impact your taxes because they're always offset. Local state funding, that's what the state determines, and we're going to go through that in detail, and that's treated a little bit separately. But the bottom line is the district assessment. Remember that 39.83 million number. You're going to see that a number of times. So now I've taken that, I've blown this up a little bit. I've added some information. We've given you some more information about the transfer of the trust funds, the unreserved fund balance, the adequacy grant, the state education. We've kind of taken those 2 revenue and the funding and blown them out a little bit. We're going to talk about the middle 2 highlighted in red. Those are the ones that come from the fund balance. So going back to Warrant Article 1, the chart that Catherine just showed, different color but same numbers, you can see the TBD for trust funds. Last year was $1 million, this year TBD because we don't know. And why don't we put a number in there? Because We're not gonna know for a while. If you look at trust funds, this is the history of what we've done the last couple of years. You can see that March, the last 3 years, all of the warrant articles for trust funds we've put on the ballot have been approved, and they've all been funded. Key point. If you look at next year, we're asking for $1 million. We don't know if you're gonna approve them, and we don't know if we're gonna be money available. So you don't put it in the number right now. You say it could happen, but it may not happen. The other thing you might notice in the chart is the different colors. Notice the Technology Trust Fund in March of '22 and the Energy Trust Fund in March of '20. Those were new trust funds, and they were funded in a different manner. All the ones this year is if there's money left over, we're going to put the money here. Those were direct appropriations. So you voted to do that. It was going to happen regardless of whether there's money at the end of the year or not. So those are different. And you'll keep that difference in mind when another chart comes up here in a second. So again, the availability of the fiscal year '23 fund balance is June of this year. Okay, remember the tax schedule. So let's go back. Why did I do it this way? Okay, I'm a chart ahead. I went backwards. That's what happened. Okay, so now let's take a look at the historical fund balance. And what we've got here is the date of your tax bill, December, the final tax bills. The school fiscal year, that's the basis of that. So let's focus on, when I talk about that, let's focus on this one here. Last December's tax bill. It was based on the fiscal year 22-23 budget, which is ongoing. It's based on, and it also included, we have budgeted fund balance of $250,000. The final column, the audited column, is what was actually used as the basis of your taxes. So we're going to talk about the difference between the $250,000 and $2.7 million, right? Again, it's all about timing. When the fund balance numbers are not available right now, fiscal year 21 was. So district assessment, again, you can't use that number because you can't use that number and you can't use that number. So don't think that your taxes are going to go up 3.86%. So how do your taxes go up? I've taken the numbers and I've kind of rearranged them here. This shows you a couple things. You notice that the top of the chart is all costs. You can see the $56.388 million at the top there. The bottom, revenues equals costs. In the previous charts, district assessment is the bottom line, the tax bill. This shows that the numbers match. The district assessment is treated as revenue. The other thing important to look at, I've already told you about in the trust funds, 100,000 and 900,000 difference. It's handled differently the way the budget's laid out. But then you drop down to the trust fund numbers at the bottom, right? There's a 900. See the 900 and 900 matches top and bottom. And the funds reduced taxes change. So what number was actually used for your December taxes? Not the 39.8 million, 37.3 million was used. Remember that number because it's going to come back a couple times. Cost equals revenues. This is going to show the impact of the fund balance on both the trust funds and taxes returned. We're going to go through those. So you get the $37.3 million number. How do you take that and allocate it to you, to your property, individual property in a given town? 3 steps. You got to divide the number by the town, you got to divide it by the property, and then you got to divide it by tax bill. What do you pay in the preliminary bill? What do you pay in the final bill? I'm going to walk through those. And we're going to do that. We're going to follow the money, $39.3 million, right? So here is the tax allocation process by town. The Articles Agreement says a couple things. It says there are going to be 2 factors used to divvy up that money amongst the towns. One is ADM, which is, what does this stand for? Average daily membership. I can never remember that. Average daily membership. It's a reflection of how many students in your town. It's not exactly a count of students. There's a process to do that, but the state captures those numbers and publishes them. Notice the year, ADM 2021. So it's data from a couple years ago, but it's just not available right now, right? Same thing in the equalized value. That's a year or so old. That's based on the total assessed property value in each town. So you go through the math and you come up with a share, like Sharon, 2.24% of the budget. Antrim, 13.86%. There's a process, and it takes time for this process to happen. So your preliminary tax bill, we're going to vote now on the budget. Remember the district assessment in the budget? And you're going to get some numbers, but you don't have this yet, because this doesn't come out till the end of the year. You're not going to have a fund balance until the end of the year. So you got to do the tax bills differently. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So first step is to allocate the numbers by town. And here's the actual, there's their $37.3 million again. And here's the actual numbers for each of the towns for the last 5 years. The actual numbers. So Dublin had to take $3.7 million and had to allocate it to all the properties that pay taxes in Dublin. Same thing with each town. All these numbers are, by the way, in the financial articles. Now you got to take the allocated by property. And what this shows here, if you look at your tax bill, there are 4 tax rates in every tax bill. There's a state education tax and a local education tax. I've highlighted them, I've combined them here and added them for you, but they don't show up that way in the spreadsheet or in your tax bill. Then you've got the town taxes and the county taxes. The total tax rate on the far right-hand, not the far right-hand column, the total rate is what determines your tax bill. So if for a mythical $200,000 home in any town, you can see what the tax bill would be. Pick Sharon, $4,642. Total taxes due in that year, but you don't pay it all at once, and it's not divided equally. So let's look at Sharon. 2 tax bills. There's the $46.42 at the bottom, so you take the $23.21 times 200, and you come out with a tax bill of $46.42, and then what you do is you take away from that what you paid in your preliminary taxes. You didn't have the tax rate in the preliminary ones, so what they do is they take the previous year's tax rate and you pay 50% of that tax rate. So there's the Sharon calculation. 50% of 2235 is 1118 times 2,000. So that house you would pay 2235. November comes around, $4,600. You take out away 2325, and lo and behold, you owe $2,400. That's how it works. Isn't that exciting? So really, I think that's the end of all the information. We did this, we wanted you to understand how your taxes were impacted, because it's important to everybody. We're very sensitive as a board, like everybody, all the other speakers have said, to tax rates going up. We're all taxpayers. We don't like it, but we also want to make sure we offer the best education possible to our children that's economically affordable. So Doug is now going to take charge.
Thank you, Jim. Everyone calm down. I know that was very riveting. I know I learned a lot of stuff I didn't know, but it was a lot. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Catherine, also for your presentation. We're going to start with any online questions this time around. Okay, is there any budget-related questions for anyone? Anyone? Budget-related? I can have Jim come up and go through that again in case you missed something. Anyone? No?
I will ask the online.
Okay, we'll do that instead. Okay.
We're all maintaining a sense of humor, right? Okay, that's why you came tonight, right? You wanted to be entertained? Okay, now we're in the wheelhouse, feeling it. All right. This question, well, actually 3 questions, come from Lisa Worth. The first question, and this is not budget-related necessarily, but we have school board members here who will be very happy to answer. If schools are consolidated, what is the plan for the empty buildings? Alan, would you like to take a stab at it?
I can. That's a good question. We do not have an answer to that right now. And it's logical, because what we are doing, so everybody is aware, is that we are forming a committee called the Strategic Organization Committee. Their charge is to take a look at consolidation reconfiguration for a bunch of factors. Number 1 is educational, which we all understand what that is. Safety, social, the community, financial involvement, control, staffing impacts, etc. we are going to be forming one committee, to be looking at these issues. We do not have the answer right now, and we don't expect to have the answer for a while. What we are doing is we are going through a process called the RFI or the RFP process. RFI is request for information. And what we do is we find outside firms, which we have, and we find out about them. We send them information about us, and they in turn will send us information about them and whether they're interested in working with us. Out of the responses we get, we then decide which ones we want to go further with. And this is called the RFP, the request for proposal. This is a detailed request that we are currently in the process of doing. And basically, it's laying out who we are, what we are trying to do, what we have done already. Because remember, this is not new to us, this process. So we're going to be engaging with an outside firm to work us through this process. As we go through it, we will also be using not only the committee, which is normally made up of school board members, it will also be made up of administration, logically, select board members from our strategic select board advisory committee, administration, the community. The most important thing going is that we will in turn start looking at having the community engaged in the process that we're going through. So they can give us their input, we can understand what's going on. And I think going back to the question of what are we going to do with the buildings? Each community will have a different take on what they want done with the buildings. And we have to take that into account. And we will all be looking at this and we will be coming up with a report that will outline what we feel, or what the whole community and what the whole school board feels will be the direction that we will be going into. We will then look to the communities to vote on this, because obviously is that the Articles of Agreement would have to be modified to allow for consolidation. This process, we figure, is going to take approximately 6 months after we get the responses back on the RFP. This is not a short-term process. It is not something that we take very lightly. So yes, do we have the answer for what are we going to do with the buildings? No, we don't right now, because we don't know which buildings we're talking about yet. That will all come out in the process. Long-winded, I hope that answers the questions about what we're doing with this. Serena?
Can you just touch on the timeline? You said 6 months until they start the.
No, 6 months. If we figure it's going to be, I'm sorry.
6 months until you have data and you have a recommendation from the school board?
Yes, exactly. Not that, it is not 6 months to implementation, if that's the nature of the question, okay? It's 6 months from the start of the project. As we go through the whole thing, going through community involvement, we will have community forums dealing with this so people understand where we're going. We will be totally transparent on this. This is not something that we're going to hide in the corner also and come out and say, here's what the answer is. Most people will know what the answer is before we even have the report. But it will be about a 6-month project to get to this report section. Then within the project, needless to say, in the report, it's going to have to be an implementation timeframe. I have no idea right now whether it's going to be a 1-year implementation, a multi-year implementation, which schools will be involved, which levels of schools will be involved. If you go into a project like this with a preordained opinion, you shouldn't be in the project. Does that help? Did that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
A couple more.
Another one?
Well, let me get in here.
Okay.
Let me moderate here. Moderating. Okay. Follow-up questions from Lisa Worth. Come back. Come on back. How much will it cost to maintain the empty buildings? And are the empty buildings being taken into consideration while moving forward with this process? As you just explained. Go ahead.
I think I touched on that, is that we're going to have to take a look at what is the agreement with each town on the buildings themselves. I am not sure at this particular point whether we have one agreement that the agreement covers each town the same, or if it covers them differently. But we do not know. Some of the towns may use the buildings for their own municipal things. Some of the towns may not want the buildings back, because right now, unless I'm mistaken, and I can be corrected, we own all the buildings.
The Conval School District
Owns all the buildings.
Yeah, go on, please.
So the school district owns all of the buildings. There are specific agreements in some of our towns regarding if the district dissolved, for instance, the Bennington building would go back to the town. And that's all outlined in the deeds, which are oh so fun to read. If something like that happens, the district actually owns the buildings, not the individual towns.
Yep. Did that answer that? Cool. Any more, or can I go away?
You good? You go.
Any other questions on that before I sit down? Okay. No more questions from the, oh, sure, please. What am I doing up here doing? Thanks, Doug.
This is a kind of a random question, but I've been sitting in this Lucy Hurlin Theater for years. Has any thought been given to renovating it as a warrant article or doing something to make it a little more presentable? I was on the board 15, 20 years ago, and it was a warrant article that went down in flames. I'm wondering if it can be revisited again.
Catherine.
He was going to help me out, but I didn't take that opportunity. So as someone who taught theater here for 7 years, right on this stage, very exciting, always fun to be back, there was a warrant article that did fail. And there's been several attempts to not only redo the theater or revive the theater. There was the Kentucky Visual Arts nonprofit that formed, and while they did do fundraisers and they tried to do the Fill the Void, which would be a separate theater to meet our capacity that we need both in the building and in the community, that has since been dissolved because they could not get the traction they needed during their capital campaigns. And the district has put in improvements. There's been lighting improvements, there's been sound improvements, there's been improvements made to this facility. But really what the feasibility study showed was that we need a whole new theater that can fit our student population in it, or a whole new auditorium style, which would go in what they call the void. When you walk into the building in the main entrance and you look out the glass right through there in that spot. So I think there has been several attempts made to answer your question, and none have been successful to date.
Thank you.
Oh, you want to answer that? No, you can. You answer that.
There's another parallel effort that we kicked off recently. We call them the Modernization Project, and that we're looking at the middle schools, 2 middle schools and the high school, and what do we need to do to those buildings to bring them to where we want them so we can implement new technology, new training methods, new teaching methods, and that program is going to look at the 3 of them, and that's the time to get that input into that package, because we've got an architect engineer on board. They've started the process. The process is going to include going to the public. I forget where they are right now. We're having a meeting next Wednesday. We have a building committee. We have 1 member of the public. We're looking for at least another member of the public on that committee. But the whole idea is to get all these ideas, put them together, and cost them, so that whether we implement the strategic plan recommendations, which can take a while to get to, or we implement the modernization plan recommendations, and hopefully those 2 are married, right? They all have to be voted on. So that's why implementation is at least a year from March. But we went to Salem High School, and they did a great job in terms of what, all their buildings and stuff like that. And the architects we hired understand the process, and a key part of the process is getting the public involved and getting people on board and so you'll vote for it. We don't know if we're going to be able to do it Lucy Hurlin Theater or not, but we hope we can do something to it. Does that answer the question, or help?
Helps.
Well, we're gonna say yes, we're gonna do it, I can't say that.
You don't have any more, Serena?
Can we do general questions?
Yeah.
Do we have any, I suppose I should stand up and make it official, right? I have a few kids in elementary school. Do we have any long-term plans to change any programming or the way we do things to provide maybe a more structured education that's benefit for everyone? In terms of like special programs, I know kids recovering from COVID are still recovering. Are we still have that on our radar?
So we absolutely still have that on our radar. We do have some structured programs in place. If you have students who are in specific need, you should be contacting your building principal. As far, your question is.
Sorry, it's very broad.
Very
I'm thinking,
broad, so-
I'm thinking more along the lines of getting the community back involved in schools,
Oh.
getting parents
Okay,
involved.
so that, yeah, you had asked a question related
Social,
to that.
emotional
So-
wellness of children.
Yep, so I actually, and happy to share with you after, sent your question to the principals to just say, hey, what are your long-term plans? We recognize that we are rebuilding some of the PTOs, for quite frankly, because, and of course I lost my internet, well, when I minimize that. Because of that, but there are multiple ways in which parents can be involved. And that starts with volunteerism, which is not everybody can do. But we also have community, and at the elementary level, we have community and harvest dinners. We have multiple nights. I know at different buildings they are reinstituting like math night and literacy night. So those things are very slowly being reinstituted as we rebuild after what has been really an unusual circumstance regarding anyone even being able to be in the buildings. So
I know you guys are always concerned about equity. Do you have a list of activities that you request that each school do so that we do have equity across all the schools and that all the kids get exposed to the same programs? Such as I know, some schools have done circus programs, some have done dancing, some have done the harvest dinners, some have done, all sorts of different things.
So as far as activities after school and those kinds of things, a lot of that, particularly the elementary level, requires volunteerism on behalf of the staff. A lot of staff right now are, just like all of us, are feeling, as Catherine put it, the reduction of their dollar and are not able to do that kind of volunteerism at this point. So we have Girls on the Run, we've had Lego clubs in some buildings. We do look to provide opportunities as equitably as possible. At some point, though, we don't have the staff in some of our buildings to be able to offer the same types of programs that are being offered, say, at PES, where there's 25 staff to draw from there and only 6 at another school.
So there's no budget for after-school activities for
There
kids
is-
in terms of elementary school?
Elementary school, there is no budget for after-school activities, not at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Problem. And Serena, just one of the biggest drivers on that isn't actually just staffing, it's also transportation.
How is that the case? Because we need to provide transportation if we have after-school programs, is that the case?
That in order to be able to provide those programs, some students would be able to get picked up by their parents and others would not. So we would want to make sure that we were able to provide some level of transportation where we can do a late bus for middle and high school, where we can have kind of group stops. Like the late bus at the middle high school is not a second run of our entire bus schedule. It's a limited run. That we really can't do with elementary students for clear reasons. We can't just drop a whole bunch of elementary students off at delays. That doesn't work.
So we can't provide after-school activities for kids in elementary school because we don't have transportation.
No, we can't provide it, first and foremost, because we don't have the staffing in order to provide it, but the other thing on top of that is the transportation challenge that we have in such a large rural district.
Good evening, my name is Ryan Griffiths. I was just curious if there were programs cut this year. Sorry I'm late to the game here, and if those programs were cut, what were they for the children that were cut out in the budget this year?
We have,
So what we brought you this year was a level service budget, so there are no cuts. The only time we'll see cuts is if we enter into that default budget. So we were able to keep our programming intact for the most part, and then our after-school activities, our extracurriculars, is that what you're talking about? For our middle school and high school, for example, all of that, it remains intact. If we enter into a default, that is when, if there's going to be cuts, that makes probably the third tier in. It's certainly not the first thing we look at because it impacts students, but eventually it's something we have to look at to fill that $1.3 million gap in the budget.
so I want to be clear that there were some, we will be eliminating some staffing positions simply because of declining enrollment. We, at this point, believe we will be able to do all of that through attrition, meaning someone's retiring and we're not going to replace that position and we may have to move some people around. So we did, just to be clear, there were some positions that we won't be moving forward.
But that doesn't
That
affect your
doesn't-
children.
Right.
I would believe unless there's, did you raise your hand again?
I have some people that are hearing consolidation and they're a little nervous. Could you speak at all to the quality of education if consolidation were to go through in terms of how it would improve for our kids?
Serena, as I mentioned earlier, is that when we go through this project, then we will develop the answers to that question. It is no, seriously, it is too early right now to do that because we do not know what we will be consolidating and how we will be consolidating yet. That's why this project is taking place.
But we'll get a thorough picture when it's all,
Yeah, absolutely.
great, thank you.
I have another question. Not me personally. I'm the stand-in. Stand-in for the community member. Okay. This is from Heather Wilson. Is there a plan for before and after-school care of elementary school kids?
So we have on several occasions contracted with different entities, so the Souhegan Valley Boys and Girls Club, we have the Grapevine, to offer before and after-school programming. Unfortunately, two things have kind of driven that. One, this year we weren't able to offer anything with the Souhegan Valley Boys and Girls Club because they could not find any staffing for that. And the other piece is that the numbers of people actually subscribing to those programs was actually pretty low in order to keep enough staff. As far as if the district is going to get into the business of before and after school care, that is not something that is kind of on the radar right now. There's actually very different procedures and rules that have to be followed for those kinds of programs, and they don't necessarily blend well with the statutory requirements that we have as a district, and sometimes there's even some conflict there. So the other piece, again, is the staffing piece, is that we do not, we simply don't, there isn't anyone who is able to staff those kinds of programs in our rural community. And I don't know if it was offered. I know that we put those offers out from Sauhegan Valley to our own staff, but it is a daunting thing to think about starting your morning at 6 a.m. and not finishing it until 5 or 6 or 7 at night. So, you know, that's where we are right now.
I guess I will do the closing remarks now. It is a little early, but that's fine. Just remember that if at any time you want to relive this forum experience, it is on the Conval YouTube channel. Access is on the Conval website, and in your communication, access information is on the website and in all your communication. Remember, this is on YouTube, so it will be there forever. And so if you want to watch it today, tomorrow, next week, the week after, that's perfectly fine. You can also share this link with others who were not able to attend while the forum was live. Thank you all again for our in-house audience. Please stay and join us for an informal meet and greet. And to our online audience, thank you for attending and have a great evening. And I thank you very much.